Quincy Promes had the world at his feet and a life many people would dream of as a multi-millionaire footballer playing for Ajax, the biggest team in the Netherlands, while also starring for the Dutch national side and earning substantial money every single week. Yet hidden from the world was the dark side of Quincy Promes, which saw him heavily involved in criminality as part of an organised crime gang on an international scale. With the cash figures associated with Promes' criminal activities, it might be fair to categorise him as a part-time footballer and a full-time drug lord. The case against Quincy Promes includes admissions of crime in wiretapped phone conversations, huge drug shipment seizures linked directly to Promes, and family members willing to testify against him for violent acts he has committed. And yet to this day, Promes is still playing football and pursuing a career as a rapper, even as his criminal exploits hit the headlines and the Dutch courts. This video tells the true story of the rise and fall of Quincy Promes and how this elite level footballer, once linked with the likes of Liverpool FC, became an international drug kingpin and fugitive, facing years behind bars if the Netherlands can get their hands on him. The story of Quincy Promes begins in Amsterdam, where he was born in 1992. Like most young boys growing up in Amsterdam, Quincy dreamed of playing football for Ajax, the biggest team in the Netherlands, who are synonymous worldwide with the city of Amsterdam. Promes showed talent from an early age and joined Ajax's famed youth system. However, it was not all smooth sailing for him, as he was released by Ajax at the age of 16, with his bad behaviour on and off the pitch being cited as the main reason for Ajax cutting ties. This devastated a young Promes, who admits he cried for days and contemplated walking away from football before his mother convinced him to continue. After leaving Ajax, Promes eventually joined FC Twente, a significant step down from Ajax, but it was the club where Promes' career as a footballer would begin to kickstart. After a successful loan spell with Go Ahead Eagles, Promes finally broke through into the first team of FC Twente in 2013 at the age of 21, and he immediately contributed with 11 goals and 8 assists in an injury-hit season. Promes also progressed through the youth ranks of the famed Dutch national team, culminating in his first senior national team appearance in May 2014. Promes' rapid rise put him on the radar of several elite European teams, with Italian giants Juventus rumoured to be one of a number of clubs with an interest in the player. After his attitude problems cost him his dream of playing at Ajax, it seemed like Promes' story was going to be one of redemption after battling his way into the national team, and he seemed poised for a move to a big club. It was a bit of a surprise then when Russian club Spartak Moscow announced in the summer of 2014 that they had signed Quincy Promes from FC Twente. The Russian league is not exactly terrible, but it isn't a top 5 league, and Promes had been linked with many bigger clubs than Spartak. Some saw it as an odd move, but Promes' Russian links would prove to be an invaluable asset later down the line for him, as his life eventually unravelled in spectacular fashion. Promes' time in Russia would prove to be a surprisingly fruitful one, as he established himself as a fan favourite at Spartak, despite fears he would suffer racial abuse. Promes was a consistent goal threat during his time in Moscow and was often Spartak's leading goalscorer, eventually becoming Spartak's highest scoring foreign-born player of all time. Promes played so well that despite doubts over the quality of the Russian league, he remained a regular in the Dutch national side. He also put to bed rumours that he'd only moved to Spartak for the money, by turning down several lucrative offers to leave, and he seemed to really embrace life in Russia, often defending the country's football fans against allegations of racism. After finishing 5 very successful seasons in Russia and even winning a Russian Premier League title, Promes eventually completed a €20 million transfer to Spanish giant Sevilla in the summer of 2018. This move was viewed as a big step up for Promes and a chance to show his talent at the club level on a bigger stage, but this move would set off a chain of events that would result in the destruction of Quincy Promes' reputation. Promes' time in Spain would prove to be brief, with just 1 season spent at Sevilla, where he struggled to make anywhere near the impact he had in Russia, with just 2 goals and 4 assists in 33 league appearances. It was then in the summer of 2019 that Quincy Promes' career came full circle, and he finally realised his childhood dream by joining his hometown club Ajax for a fee of €15 million. After blowing his chance with Ajax as a kid, Promes had fought his way back to his boyhood club and was back in the city where he had grown up. While on the face of it this seemed to be a perfect reunion, it would prove to be anything but that. Promes being around childhood friends and family in a city that has emerged as a global crime hub would result in an unbelievable downfall of Promes' career and set off a chaotic chain of events that are still playing out in the Dutch court to this very day. Promes' first year in Amsterdam was a relatively quiet one off the pitch compared to the chaos that would follow, as he started mixing back in with family members he hadn't seen for many years, as his career had took him away from Amsterdam. On the pitch, it was a return to form after his bad season with Sevilla. Despite playing just 20 games in a COVID-affected season, Promes bagged 12 league goals and 4 assists, a similar level of performance to when he used to dominate in Russia. Due to COVID cancelling the season, there was no league champion, but Ajax had been leading at the time of the cancellation. But it was after this stellar debut season for Ajax that Promes' life would begin to unravel, and the criminal side of Quincy Promes would come to the fore at a family reunion barbecue of all places. With Promes now living in Amsterdam again, he'd gotten closer with his extended family, and in July 2020 decided to throw a barbecue at a warehouse he owned in Abcoude, a town located just outside of Amsterdam. The party started pleasantly, but would deteriorate disastrously. Attending the party was a cousin of Quincy Promes, who he was not particularly close with, who we will refer to as Cousin A. An argument involving Cousin A broke out, with several family members accusing Cousin A of stealing money from Quincy Promes' aunt. Whether he actually stole anything is unknown, but the argument got extremely heated and would be escalated to a disgraceful level. As Cousin A was attempting to leave the party, Quincy Promes followed him while holding a knife, before stabbing his cousin deep into his knee. He only missed his cousin's upper body because his cousin had tripped over a curb and defended his torso with his legs, while Promes' father also stepped in to try and stop the incident from becoming fatal. Blood poured out of the victim's leg and he was quickly rushed to the hospital by a relative, with hospital staff shocked by how deep the wound was. This stabbing would have life-changing effects for Cousin A, who reportedly can no longer run or climb stairs without pain and suffers from PTSD and trouble sleeping after the attack. You would have thought that such a brazen stabbing in front of family members would have been reported to the police, but it seems the Promes family was happy to try and keep the issue in-house, with nobody reporting the incident to the police, meaning Promes probably thought that he'd get away with the incident. But little did Promes know that he was actually already under surveillance by the police for other crimes he was suspected of, and the investigation had progressed to a point where the police had permission to wiretap his phones, and on these wiretaps they uncovered some shocking admissions from Promes in the aftermath of the stabbing. Just hours after stabbing his cousin, Quincy Promes was caught on wiretap making a call to his father to complain about him protecting his cousin, saying, "Why did you jump in front of him? You saved his life. I would have killed him. You understand that, right?" So yeah, a couple of hours after stabbing his cousin, the police had audio of Promes confessing to a crime they weren't even aware he had committed. 10 minutes after snitching on himself, Promes made another call, again wiretapped, to his mother and aunt to inquire about where on the body he had stabbed his cousin. When he was informed that it was the leg, Promes replied that his cousin was lucky and he vowed to kill anyone who stole from his family. Promes then warned them that anyone who crossed them would see the other side of him, not the footballer side, in an ominous reveal of a criminal side that was not yet known to the public. Promes then decided to add gun possession to the list of crimes he was confessing to, as he stated in another call to his father that Cousin A was lucky that I don't walk with a firearm anymore, or that thing would have been even uglier. These wiretaps had unearthed Promes admitting to an attempted murder that was completely unknown to the police. However, the crime was not reported to the police, and with an existing case being built against Promes for separate offences, nothing was done at the time, and Promes continued on with his preparations for the 2020-2021 season with Ajax, knowing in the back of his mind that he tried to end his cousin's life just a couple of months earlier. Perhaps hiding this secret weighed on Promes' mind a little bit, as his form dipped slightly from the sensational highs of his first season back at Ajax, with just 1 goal and no assists in his first 8 games in all competitions. A couple of months into the season, Promes received some good news and some bad news. The good news was that he no longer had to hide the secret that seemed to be weighing on his mind and affecting his performances. The bad news was that the reason he didn't have to hide it anymore was because his cousin had finally decided to report the incident to police after 5 months. This led to Promes' arrest in December 2020, where he was questioned and later released pending further investigation. Promes denied any involvement in the incident. The news of this stabbing and subsequent arrest sent shockwaves around Dutch football and made headlines across Europe for the absurdity of an active and high-profile Dutch international professional footballer being investigated for stabbing his own cousin. Promes must have been feeling the heat at this point, as he got 2 friends to visit the cousin and offer him €20,000 to drop his report about the incident, which his cousin refused. Promes tried again, this time with a relative who went to the police and confessed to the stabbing to try and save Promes. But given the police had their wiretaps of Promes admitting to the crime, and the relative couldn't recall details of the incident that he should have known, he was asked to leave and no further action was taken. In the wake of Promes' arrest, Ajax opted to stand by their player and continue to play him, of course presuming innocence until proven guilty. The Dutch national team also stood by Promes, who continued playing for the Netherlands while the investigation was carried out by the Dutch authorities. Ajax were defiant in public, with manager Erik ten Hag vowing to stand behind Promes, who he'd worked with at both Ajax and Go Ahead Eagles. But behind closed doors, the club were clearly concerned, as they began to lay the groundwork for a deal to get rid of Promes and take a substantial loss on the €15 million they'd paid for him just 18 months ago. You may be thinking that given Promes was under investigation for attempted murder, he would not have been able to go abroad, and especially not move abroad. But that was not the case, and Promes had free rein to leave the Netherlands should he choose to, but would be expected to return for any court appearances. Predictably, given that he was being investigated for attempted murder, there was scant interest in signing Promes in the January transfer window. That was until a familiar friend came in with a bid of €8 million. Spartak Moscow, the Russian club where Promes had dominated before, re-signed Promes in February 2021, paying just over half of the fee Ajax had paid to sign Promes, a substantial loss for Ajax. With no travel restrictions from the authorities, Promes packed his bags and moved to Moscow while the investigation continued. Promes finished out the season with Spartak and began the 2021-22 season looking to kick on and rediscover the form he'd shown in his last spell in Moscow, even with the investigation hanging over him. However, Promes' season was disturbed in November when the Dutch Public Prosecution Service announced they would prosecute Quincy Promes for attempted manslaughter, an offence carrying a potential sentence of up to 4 years in prison. There was a further blow to Promes when a villa worth €2.1 million he owned in the Netherlands was seized in relation to a civil case brought against him by his cousin. The drama around Promes caused Dutch national team manager Louis van Gaal to announce that he would not consider him for selection anymore, as he feared Promes would struggle to focus on the games with everything hanging over his head, meaning his international career was effectively over after amassing 50 caps. The stabbing itself was a shocking crime for a famous footballer to commit. However, it could be explained away as a moment of rage that wasn't reflective of the true character of Quincy Promes. But as Promes had stated to his father over the phone, there was another side to Promes, a dark side, and that stabbing hadn't been his dark side's only foray into serious criminality. Details would start to leak in the press that Promes' phone had been wiretapped, and the police had confessions from Promes admitting to the stabbing. But that didn't answer the question of why exactly was Promes being wiretapped in the first place. You can't exactly just randomly wiretap someone because you feel like it. There had to be something ongoing that would have warranted Promes being wiretapped. De Telegraaf, a popular newspaper in the Netherlands, would eventually unearth the reason for the wiretaps from a source close to the investigation. The source revealed that Promes was under investigation for drug trafficking and participation in a serious criminal organisation. Additionally, Promes was suspected of domestic violence. From here, it was only going to get worse for Promes, as staggering details would emerge that painted him out to be an international drug lord and gangster whose side hobby was playing football. Sources alleged that Promes and some family members had invested a substantial amount of money into purchasing a whopping 4,000 kilos of cocaine that was supposed to be smuggled through the crime haven port of Antwerp in multiple shipments before moving on to its final destination of Australia. Police estimated this shipment had a wholesale value of €120 million, with the street value being even higher. Promes hadn't just dabbled in drug smuggling, he'd gone in with both feet. This smuggling plan was blown up spectacularly, however, when Belgian police intercepted half of the shipment and seized it. Even worse, Promes was directly linked to the shipments via messages he had sent from an encrypted Sky ECC phone, an encrypted phone network used by criminals the world over, particularly in the Netherlands and Belgium, to coordinate shipments of drugs through the ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp. The Sky ECC network was hacked by police, which had allowed them to decrypt the messages sent by Promes. In 2020, while Promes was actively playing football for the biggest club in the Netherlands and the Dutch national team, he was also simultaneously coordinating huge drug shipments across the globe. At the beginning of 2020, Promes sent a message via his Sky phone which read, "My boys are on their way to Antwerp," referring to his shipment of coke. The shipment arrived on January 29th, and members of Promes' gang sent him photos of the goods and the containers in which they were hidden. As mentioned previously, roughly half of the shipment had been intercepted, something Promes lamented about in messages on his Sky ECC phone, in which he said, "My previous delivery was half a failure, one was clamped, my entire profit was halved, half is safe, risk of the game." So it was now public that Quincy Promes was accused of being a dangerous international drug smuggler and would be tried for those crimes in the Netherlands and brought to justice. But there was just one issue with that. Promes was in Russia and he seemed to have no intention of coming back to the Netherlands. As time went by and we got closer to a trial date for the stabbing being announced, Promes just went about his business in Russia like nothing was happening. It was not clear if there was any path to Promes being extradited from Russia. Due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, relations between Russia and the Netherlands had died, and there was no chance that Russia would cooperate with extraditing Promes. The issue of extradition was further complicated by reports that Quincy Promes was planning to become a Russian citizen. Russia does not extradite its citizens, and if Promes was successfully able to secure a Russian passport, it would mean the chances of him facing justice for his crimes were essentially nil. Promes has always been smart with its public image in Russia, consistently stating how much he loves life there and defending Russian football against allegations of racism, something which further endeared him to fans of Spartak Moscow and Russians in general. He has even declared to Russian media that with or without the passport, he considers himself to be Russian, which is very convenient. However, it remains to be seen whether Promes can successfully twerk his way into a Russian passport that would guarantee him immunity from extradition. There was no pause to Promes' club career, as he consistently played for Spartak Moscow with a monster 2022-23 season in which he scored 20 goals and 7 assists in just 27 league games and became Spartak's top Russian Premier League goalscorer of all time. Promes being unable to travel outside of the country for European games is not an issue, as Russian clubs have been barred from European competitions due to the Ukrainian invasion. Eventually, Promes' trial for attempted manslaughter proceeded this summer, and unsurprisingly, Promes opted not to show for the trial and instead stayed firmly in Russia. Also unsurprising, Promes was found guilty of assaulting his cousin and sentenced to 18 months in prison, with his trial for drug smuggling offences to follow. But again, Promes is in Russia and does not seem to care about anything happening back in the Netherlands. In fact, it seems he's decided that the extra publicity his criminal actions are giving him is the perfect launching pad for a rap career, with 3 songs released in the last few months, adding rapper to his career choices of football and drug lord. On Instagram, it's again like nothing has happened, as Promes posts normally and even gets supports from the likes of Chelsea player Hakim Ziyech. It is clear that Promes has no intention to return to the Netherlands and will be safe in Russia for a number of years on his work visa, with the intention to become a Russian citizen and stay there permanently out of the reach of justice. I guess this technically means Promes is on the run and has gone from international footballer to international fugitive. The story of Quincy Promes could have been one of redemption and hometown success after he clawed his way back to Ajax, but returning to Amsterdam and surrounding himself with unscrupulous family members ended up being the downfall of his reputation and his career. While Promes may keep up the pretense that nothing is going on, his reputation has been irreversibly damaged, and he may one day eventually be made to face justice for the serious crimes that he has committed. The end. If you like this video, you might enjoy my video on Carlos Kaiser, the most infamous fraudster in football history who lied his way through a 20-year football career. Alternatively, check out the playlist on my channel for videos from other sports such as MMA and American football. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.